now the Ministry of Sask Builds and Procurement. The Ministry of Highways appropriately maintained up-to-date and documented standard specifications for its various types of roadworks, such as width of bridges and pavement requirements. The Ministry used procurement methods for roadworks consistent with Sask Builds' requirements and trade agreements. That is, for roadworks procurements over $100,000, the Ministry uses either a pre-qualified tender or open tender. We found the Ministry set clear requirements for individual roadworks that it planned to issue in open tender. Requirements include scope, budget, design, specifications, and planned schedules. The Ministry selected bidders based on the results of Sask Builds' evaluation of proposals. We found the Ministry appropriately approved winning bidders for roadworks consistent with its delegation of authority policy. The Ministry consistently used standard contract templates when drafting and finalizing contracts for roadworks with consultants. For roadworks with contractors, it used the signed bid submission of the selected bid as the contract. Overall, fairly procuring roadworks services increases the likelihood of the Ministry selecting the most suitable bidder, achieving the intended results, and not paying more than necessary. This concludes my presentation, and I'll pause for the committee's consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the focus of the work and the presentation. I'd like to table document PAC 12729, Ministry of Highways status update, dated February 5th, 2024. I also want to thank folks with the Ministry for putting together the status updates. They help us focus our questions here at the table. I'll kick it over to Deputy Minister Toffin for brief remarks on Chapter 7, then we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As validated by the Provincial Auditor in Chapter 7 of the 2021 report, Volume 1, the Ministry places a high value on good communication, fairness and planning, and Highways works diligently to ensure fair and clear procurement processes, as was alluded to in the remarks. Every effort is made to make sure specifications to contract for road work align with good practice. And this is not just good practice in Saskatchewan, but we look more broad outside our borders too to look at what others are doing. Proactive communication, multi-year planning, effective processes, and appropriate procurement methods ensure that interested contractors are treated equitably and that the Ministry obtains the best value. So I think I'll just maybe leave my comments at that. And you know, we're quite pleased at the recommendations, or actually the report, I should just say, and you know, look forward to any questions.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Minister Toffin. I'll open it up at this point to members for questions on Chapter 7. Ms. Saar.
Thank you, and thank you to both of you for your report and the progress that's been made. I just have a few questions for you around the work that you're doing. I understand that this audit specifically is dealing with the processes regarding awarding contracts for roadworks for prices that are greater than $100,000. Could you advise us about what percentage of your contracts for roadworks fall within that price range?
I don't know that we have the exact percentage, but it's the large majority of construction work would be over that. I think over time, $100,000 just with inflation has led to most of our contracts being well over $100,000 for construction works.
Okay. That leads into the next question I was going to ask you, is whether or not that pool of contracts has been growing over time. Can you just elaborate a little bit more on that? You just indicated that it has, but I want to hear some more elaboration on that, if that's possible.
You just mean the number of contracts over 100,000?
Correct. Yeah, you've indicated that it's grown over time, the amount. So I'm just want.
Yeah, I think there's two parts it's been growing. So it's been growing on the number just because there's, you know, inflation and more contracts over. But just over time, especially during this period with stimulus funding, there's just more money available for contracts. I don't have the exact number of how many contracts were let during this period, but I'm not sure if others do. But it's just it was just the nature of the time period, just the more stimulus funding available, and more contracts typically over that $100,000 threshold.
And can you walk us through the process for awarding contracts that are under $100,000?
Do I gotta turn it on? Oh, it's already on. Good morning, everyone. Tom Lees, ADM with the Operation and Maintenance Division. So in terms of contracts under 100,000, I guess what I would say is the vast majority of our capital program, those are contracts over 100,000, and they go through e-builder through the process that was essentially audited. For our contracts under 100,000, we follow the thresholds under the trade rule agreements. When we go out, we are taking a look at the contractors in the area, as well as the type of work that we're going to be contracting out. So depending on that, we can take a couple different routes. We can go through the full procurement process. With that, we would go through for a capital project. In some areas, we may be looking at getting 3 bids from local contractors to be able to get the work done. And then in some certain sense, we might go out and do a sole source.
Under what circumstances do you go sole source contracting?
So sole source would certainly be the least amount of procurement that we would do. We're taking a look at the type of work we're delivering. So there may be times during our winter maintenance operations where we're facing a winter storm and we need immediate response. Or if there's an emergency across the province like flooding, where we need some emergency response, we may look at sole sourcing to get some of that work done. We still follow the rules under the trade thresh agreement, though, doing that.
Thank you. Moving back to contracts over $100,000 and the subject of this audit, can you advise for the period that was under review by the auditor if any of the contracts awarded did not go to the low bidder, given that you're using best value set of criteria?
Wayne Guido, ADM of Design and Construction. And your initial question about how many contracts we actually release each year, it's somewhere between 100 and 150 on the construction side, and then a number on the consultant sides that do our design and do our engineering in the field. So the auditor actually mentioned in the report there's about 200 contracts a year that we look at. So when we look at best value, it's a combination of both price as well as other criteria. We look at safety as an important one, and we look at past performance. So in the samples the auditor looked at, all but one was based on the overall best value. And in that one particular case, it was a discussion with the contractor, and they just won a couple other contracts at the same time. So they didn't actually have capacity to get the work done by that time period. So it was mutually agreed that they wouldn't proceed with that contract. So it's very, very rare that you don't go with the best value contract. Now, when you say, is it always the lowest price? No, it isn't, because that's why we move to best value. Looking at other factors as well, like I said, past performance is usually a really good indication of how they're going to do in the future, right? And the other piece is the safety component. We want to make sure that our contractors take that very seriously and that they are being very safe out there in the field.
Thank you.
Thanks. Just before we close, just to follow up on, drill down on just a couple of those questions. If you don't have the information here today, you can certainly supply it in the coming weeks. Are you able to provide us the number of contracts that are under that $100,000 threshold? Then you have roughly 200 contracts. Is that what I'm understanding? Do you know here today how many contracts would be under that $100,000 threshold?
Yes, absolutely. We can give you an estimate on the actual number, less than 100,000. Going back to this time period, they're each stored within our different area offices. So we'll have to canvass them and get you that estimate back. Yep.
That sounds good. I suspect as well you'll need to canvass them to answer the second question. The second is, can you supply to us the number of contracts that were sole sourced? And then can you provide to the committee the value of that contract and who was contracted? Is that all information that you're able to provide back to us in the coming weeks?
Just to clarify, are you looking for this particular time period? I'm assuming so?
That's
Yes.
correct.
Yep.
We'll be able to provide that information to the best of our abilities. We do have to do a bit of, scanning our regions, as Wayne pointed out, but we don't have the exact number, but it's a lot higher just because there's a lot of small contracts.
You bet.
So.
That's great. Thanks so much for that. And that information is a 1 month period of time. Is that a reasonable time period for you to fulfill that request to this committee?
Yes, that should be fine.
Great. And that can just be supplied through the committee clerk, and then that'll be shared with all of us, tabled as with the public accounts. Moving along here, I guess I'd welcome a motion to conclude consideration of Chapter 7. I think Ms. Lambert's making a speech or a protest or a moved by Mr. Lean that we conclude consideration of Chapter 7. All agreed? Agreed. That's carried. We'll move along now to Chapter 4. There's some new recommendations here, and I'll turn it over to our provincial auditor to make a presentation.
Thank you. Saskatchewan's road network is the largest in Canada on a per capita basis. Year-round transportation of goods is critical to Saskatchewan's economic success. Safe transportation in the winter requires clear roads. The Ministry of Highways is responsible for maintaining provincial highways, including in the winter. Winter maintenance entails keeping provincial highways clear of snow and ice. Snow or ice-covered roads creates dangerous driving conditions for all highway drivers and increases the risk of sliding into the ditch or of collisions. The Ministry uses its Highway Hotline website and application to inform the public about current road conditions. In each of the last 3 fiscal years, the Ministry spent more than $50 million on winter maintenance. Effective processes for prioritizing snow and ice removal from provincial highways decreases dangerous road and driving conditions. Chapter 4 in our 2023 report, Volume 1, starting on page 47, reports the results of our audit of whether the Ministry of Highways had effective processes for the 15-month period ending January 31st, 2023, to conduct winter maintenance on provincial highways in Saskatchewan. This audit did not include processes to conduct winter maintenance on the Regina Bypass, since the Ministry hired a third-party company to maintain it. We concluded the Ministry had effective processes to conduct winter maintenance, except for the 4 areas highlighted in our report. We made 4 new recommendations. On page 53, we recommend the Ministry of Highways update the Highway Hotline to provide clear and concise road condition terminology for winter driving. The Ministry established guides for staff to use to determine highway conditions. It reports highway conditions to the public on the Highway Hotline. We found areas where the Ministry could improve its terminology used to help staff consistently assess and drivers interpret what is conveyed about the highway condition. For example, the Ministry could make it clear that travel not recommended means that roads would be unsuitable for non-essential driving. Also, the Ministry could define what is meant by highway is doubtful when using this term in its definitions. Unclear terminology could result in drivers misinterpreting road conditions on the Highway Hotline, which could cause them to decide to travel on a highway when it may not be safe to do so. On page 57, we recommend the Ministry of Highways sufficiently track whether winter maintenance equipment operators meet work scheduling safety requirements, for example, comply with rest periods, or waive mandatory 10-hour rest periods. The provincial government and the related union require a mandatory period of 10 consecutive hours of rest for each equipment operator in every 24-hour period for employee safety. The Ministry schedules staff to consider this rest period. The ministry has a waiver process for equipment operators when they do not take their required rest period. We found the ministry does not sufficiently monitor whether employees receive this minimum 10-hour rest period. When supervisors enter time into Highways' IT system, the system tracks all hours entered under that supervisor's name instead of tracking the time to each individual operator. Therefore, reports from the system appear like the supervisor worked the amount of hours that the entire crew did. Thus, the ministry does not have the data by operator to be able to monitor working and resting requirements. An employee may waive this rest period due to extreme weather conditions, which require longer hours or more staff to clear the roads. The ministry requires the supervisor to approve this waiver of the rest period. By allowing staff to waive the required rest period, the ministry can schedule staff to assist in meeting its winter levels of service. Because of the lack of monitoring, it is unaware how many employees waived their rest period. Furthermore, we found only 2 of 7 employees tested documented their agreement to waive this rest period. The remaining 5 employees did not have the required waiver completed, indicating they agreed to waive the rest period. Management indicated the employee and the supervisor reached a verbal agreement. Not properly tracking or approving waiver agreements when employees choose to waive the 10-hour rest period increases the risk the ministry does not know whether operators meet work scheduling safety requirements. Equipment operators who waive the mandatory rest period may become fatigued. Fatigue increases the risk of causing collisions and may make the ministry liable for accidents. On page 58, we recommend the Ministry of Highways set a time frame for reporting instances to management when not meeting service level expectations for highway winter maintenance. Similarly, on page 59, we recommend the Ministry of Highways require managers to review instances where staff did not meet service level expectations for highway winter maintenance. Section 4.3 of the chapter on page 53 reports on the ministry's prioritization plan called Winter Levels of Service for when it expects to clear snow on highways. These levels of service determine what activities equipment operators will complete and when. For example, the ministry plans to remove snow on driving lanes within 6 hours of the end of a storm on highways with more than 1,500 vehicles per day. The ministry expects staff to complete an exception report when it does not meet its planned levels of service. However, the ministry does not have a set time frame for completing exception reporting or require staff to review these reports. We found for 3 of 9 exception reports tested, staff did not submit the report until at least a week after the event took place. For 1 exception report we tested, staff did not submit the exception report until 79 days after the weather event took place. Also, for the 9 exceptions report tested, we found management in charge of the area had not documented review of these exception reports. Having a manager review exceptions confirms the accuracy of the reports. Also, having managers review exception reports timely helps ensure that all exception reports are reported that should be. Without timely reporting of exceptions to levels of service, the ministry cannot make timely adjustments to help ensure it meets its expectations for levels of service in the future. This concludes my presentation. I will pause for the committee's consideration. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for the important focus of your work on this front. I'll turn it over to Deputy Minister Toffin for brief remarks, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As was alluded to, the provincial auditor recently undertook a performance audit on the ministry's processes to conduct winter maintenance on provincial highways for the 15-month period ending January 31st, 2023. The report was released publicly in June of 2023 as Chapter 4, as was just discussed. As the ministry's winter maintenance activities are closely tied to public safety, the ministry is very mindful of the criticality of the processes associated with these winter maintenance activities and has noted the importance of the 4 related recommendations provided by the provincial auditor. The 4 recommendations are as follows, and it was gone through already. The ministry update the highway hotline to provide clear and concise road condition terminology for winter driving. Number 2, the ministry sufficiently track whether winter maintenance equipment operators meet work scheduling requirements, and that's basically whether they're complying with the rest periods or waive the mandatory 10-hour rest period. Third, the ministry set a time frame for reporting instances to management when not meeting service level expectations for highway winter maintenance. And also number 4, the ministry require managers to review instances where staff did not meet service level expectations for highway winter maintenance. I will say that the ministry has started working on addressing these 4 recommendations and are taking them very seriously. And this will involve documenting processes and adding standards to the ministry's maintenance manual. This work will go through an approval process in order to fully implement the provincial auditor's recommendations effectively in the near future. And so our team is working on these quite actively. And instead of going through more of the information, I think I'll just leave my comments at that.
Thank you, Deputy Minister Toff, and thanks to all those that have been involved in this important work. Thanks for laying out as well the commitments to have this operational and to have compliance on these fronts by the upcoming winter season. I'll open it up to committee members for questions. Ms. Saar.
Thank you, and I appreciate your opening comments. I have a few questions. My first relates to the data shown in Figure 1 of this chapter, which provides the budget and actual winter maintenance cost analysis, which shows that there has been, for the past several years, a budget shortfall percentage, which ranges from 36% to 98%. Could you explain to the committee why the ministry sets their budget so much lower than what would be considered a 5-year average of the actual cost?
Thanks for that question. Of course, our, on the Chapter 4 table, I think I'm on the right one, Figure 1 you're alluding to? Yeah. So the reality is going into winter maintenance budget estimates is a very difficult thing. You look at this year, for instance, where we haven't had a lot of snowfall. We haven't had a lot of need to be on the highways every single day. Of course, there's still sanding and salting and everything else, but it's a very difficult thing to really pin down. So every year we go in with our estimate at Treasury Board, and we get a budget according to the estimate that we provide, knowing that if there's more funding required throughout the year, that we'll ask for it during supplementary estimates or special warrant. And so I don't really have a crystal clear answer as to the budget shortfall, but I would say that it's quite difficult to pin down exactly what the winter maintenance activities will cost throughout a year.
Can you provide some further detail as to how you get to the number that you make your request in estimates?
Our estimate is based on all the cost of doing business, including salaries, operating, buying different materials through contracts that we have. We do look at previous years, and we do put estimates forward based on those previous years. But Treasury Board makes decisions on what's appropriate for that fiscal year, and knowing full well that there's a lot of fluctuation that happens in this space.
As I had already indicated, the 5-year average of the actuals would indicate a number that should be budgeted as much higher than what has been allocated over the past several years. Can you provide some information as to perhaps why that number is the number that's allocated?
I'll provide some commentary on the question. Thanks for that question, by the way. So one of the things that is also noticeable on the table and is that we're getting increases in that budget. So if you look at 22-23, it increased by a substantial amount, and actually 23-24 is not on here, but we do get another substantial increase in that year, and we're just trying to get that number on what that was. And so the trend is in the right direction on getting the budget more aligned to the actuals in previous years. We're maybe not quite there yet, but we do the best we can on trying to estimate for our decision makers on what those costs are going to be. Again, recognizing that it's very difficult to know.
Absolutely. Just to commit, you are going to provide the actual number for 23-24?
Absolutely, we'll provide that to the committee, yes.
Thank you. As you've mentioned and as is indicated in the chapter, it says here above the table that I'm looking at that in each of the last 5 years, the ministry has also required a reallocation or a special warrant in excess of $10 million to meet its budget shortfall. In 2022-23, there was a reallocation of $30 million for winter maintenance costs. Can you provide, can you tell the committee which sub-vote that money typically gets reallocated from?
Yes, absolutely, and my team is just sharing some information with me here, but it's typically from the capital subvote, and that's in recognition too that that's also complicated to forecast any given year on how much work our third-party partners are going to do in any year for repaving works, bridge works on the construction side, and so. When we do have under expenditures on that side, we can wire money from capital to operating to shore up this budget.
Have there been instances where capital projects have had to be delayed, pushed back a different year because the money needed to be reallocated to deal with winter maintenance?
No, we're not aware of anything that has been purposefully stopped or slowed down to ensure that we have money for winter maintenance. It's more of a natural progression where sometimes construction season doesn't go as long as other years, and therefore we have savings, but we've never slowed down a project. And through contract with third parties, they're just not structured that way for us to tell them to slow down.
So it's always worked out so that if there was excess in the capital subvote, you could move it into winter maintenance without there being any hindrances to the work that was being done under the capital subvote?
Yeah, that's right. That's correct, yeah.
Okay. And then, just so that I understand, any more money that's needed, that then comes through as a special warrant request?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
I can wait.
I just want to clarify the number for winter maintenance, just so that I don't have to get back in written form for 2023-24 is $42.237 million. So it did increase again substantially.
Thank you for that number. Appreciate it. Is all winter maintenance done by Ministry of Highways employees, or is some of that work contracted out through third parties?
So the answer to your question is yes, the majority is delivered in-house through maintenance staff across the province. We've got 74 sections across the province that deliver that winter maintenance. We do supplement that with third-party contractors, though the majority of that is in the northern part of the province. And then we also, as part of our emergency response plan for winter, we do have contracts that are ready to go. So we do get third-party contractors to support us, especially in those adverse weather conditions.
You mentioned specifically that a lot of the third-party contracts are to provide maintenance work on, winter maintenance work on the northern highways. Could you explain a little bit how those contracts work? With respect to the northern highways in particular?
Sure, just so to clarify, when you say in terms of how they work, are you looking in terms of how we procure them, or in terms of how
yes.
they're?
Apologies, yeah, how they're procured, yeah.
Okay. So lots of the contracts in the northern part of the province, they go through a sole source process and engagement with First Nation communities across the northern part of the province. So a lot of the work is delivered through the Athabascan Basin Development Corporation, which is a conglomerate of First Nation communities in the north, and they deliver both winter and summer maintenance. They also deliver the construction and maintenance of the ice roads in the north that connect some of those communities that don't have a connection outside of airports.
Thank you. If, I'm not sure if you'll have this ready, but if you do not have it here, I would ask if you could table it, but could you provide to the committee a list of the contractors that are presently employed to handle road maintenance in northern Saskatchewan?
I have that information on hand today, but certainly we can table that.
Thank you. The Regina bypass, is that maintained by highways employees, or is that also contracted out?
Out.
And how is that work paid?
In terms of the Regina bypass, how that is paid, so it's through set price in the contract. A portion of that is for capital work in the future, as well as the operating piece of that. So the monthly payment is already set in the contract.
Particular sub-vote?
We're going to get that information. We just want to make sure we give the committee the right information. And I don't have the exact number yet, but we're getting it.
I appreciate that. Are the same service level expectations expected of third-party contractors as it is for highways employees when maintaining roads?
Yes, so any contract we take out with a third party for winter maintenance, they're required to meet our minimum level of service.
So just for further clarification, that includes both northern Saskatchewan highways and the Regina bypass. Does the ministry also track safety requirements for both highway staff and for the staff of third-party contractors?
Repeat that.
Safety requirements, for example, the requirement around the 10 hours and the break that is needed as it's been talked about in the chapter. Is that also tracked for third-party staff by the ministry?
Not that I'm aware of, but each contractor will be responsible for the management of their own staff. We are required to provide our staff with a 10-hour rest period through an agreement with the Government of Saskatchewan and our union.
And that's not a requirement for third parties as a part of the contract?
Not that I'm aware of.
And I do have that subvote. So it's H10, operation of transportation system, and it's under operational services line.
Just on that, thanks for identifying that. Just on that, what's the value of the maintenance within that subvote then?
The actuals for 22, 23 are 13.8 million.
Thanks, and just to be clear, that's the maintenance on the bypass itself. That doesn't include the capital component.
That's right. It's the operations and maintenance component of that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just moving back to third-party safety, is there anything that the ministry is doing to enhance supervision of that third-party safety? Is there any conversations around building that into the contract in a deeper way than already exists?
Yeah, so in terms of safety, so any third-party contractor would be required to meet our minimum safety requirements. In terms of the oversight, that would be done through their supervisors and managers and third parties. We don't have oversight specifically to the winter maintenance component. We do when it comes to our summer maintenance. We have people that go out and do audits to ensure that they're meeting that minimum safety requirement.
Is there a reason why it's not done for winter maintenance?
So in terms of winter maintenance, I mean, winter maintenance is quite ad hoc, as you can appreciate with the weather that's coming in. We don't have, I mean, we've got staff that are out doing actual road work. And so we've put that requirement onto the contractor.
Do you have the number of instances in, for winter 22, 23, where service level expectations were not met?
here quickly for you.
Just so I fully understand what is and isn't being tracked by the ministry, would that just include roads maintained by Ministry of Highway employees, or would they also include third-party contract highways?
So back to your first question first. For the 22-23, I think that's what you were asking for. There was 85 times that were noted that the level of service weren't met. And in terms of that requirement, so any third-party contractor that doesn't meet the level of service is required to inform the ministry on that.
Could you provide a breakdown then on that 85? How much of that is Ministry of Highway and how much of that is third-party?
We can for sure, yeah.
Thank you. Would you be able to provide the ministry a copy of all of the reports prepared by the ministry for those 85 instances?
Yes.
Thank you. Just one quick question here, and I'll see if there's anyone else before we vote on these items. Thanks again for all the answers. One number that isn't in the auditor's report, just due to the timing of the report, would be the actual for the 2022-23 budget from that first graph that was being referenced by Ms. Saar, the actual on winter maintenance. Do you have that number handy by chance?
Yeah, the actual for the 22-23 fiscal year for winter maintenance was 66.273 million.
Thanks so much. So that would be up in that upper end range as far as budget shortfall percentages that are identified there. One final question from me, and that's just with respect to this tracking of the waiving of the 10-hour rest period for maintenance operators. I appreciate very much that there's going to be better tracking and monitoring on this front and compliance with the recommendation going into the next year's season. Based on the records you have, are you aware of an incident or a safety situation or incident or accident that where a proper process wasn't followed with respect to that waiver of the rest period?
No, we're not aware of anything of that nature. What I will say is that our team is extremely diligent on making sure that they are fit for work and ensuring that their safety is paramount, and they're quite committed. I haven't met all of our 1,300 employees, but what I would say is that these are long-term veteran people in many cases, and kind of do take consideration of fatigue and whatnot. But we're not aware of anything that would have been caused by that issue.
Okay, not any further questions? Ms. Lambert.
Thank you. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the highway hotline. I appreciate that there is now an app that people can refer to and check on their travels, safely check on their travels. Driving the Highway 11 very regularly from back and forth to Saskatoon and Regina, I regularly check the highway hotline. So I'm just wondering if you could go over briefly how that's updated.
Yeah, so to clarify, you're looking in terms of how do we update the road condition data that's provided to the public. So I'd said earlier, we've got 74 sections across the province that have trained operators that are out on the road. So when they're doing their road checks, they're responsible to be assessing the road conditions, making a decision based on what they're seeing on what needs to be updated on the highway hotline. And then they're phoning into our highway hotline office, which is staffed with operators 24/7 through the winter period, who are then going into the system and providing those updates. In terms of minimum updating, so at a minimum, they're required to update conditions 4 times a day. Depending on whether it's a commuter or non-commuter road, their first report on the day can change. But they are updating those conditions as the weather is changing. So it's a minimum 4 times a day, but they could be updating a specific road segment many, many more times than that in a day to make sure that the public has the most information up to date. The other thing that we do have with the highway hotline is, I think, hopefully everybody's seen by now, we've got cameras that you can click on to actually see what the road condition looks like. So that's being used both by the public, but as well by our staff, who are making sure that they're trying to route those trucks as efficiently as they can across the network. So they're looking at the cameras to see what the road conditions look like so that they can make good, efficient decisions on the road.
Thank you. You mentioned a number. Is there a number that perhaps the public could call to if they believe that the highway hotline status is not accurate at any point in time?
So we've got a customer service center where anybody that's got an issue, whether it's winter maintenance or something else related to the highways, they can call that number.
Is that 24/7?
So they can call 24/7. There's only people that are actually manning those 8 to 5, Monday to Friday, but there is a recording that people can leave messages on that will be picked up.
All right, thank you.
Thanks. It's a good question. And so just to be clear, your question was sort of the nature, do citizens or volunteers, do they have the ability to provide an update that might be incorporated into the highway hotline status that's provided? Right now, that's not really the case. Is that right? It would help provide information around response to maybe unsafe roads or something. But would it be incorporated, or is there a way for that to be incorporated into updates to the highway hotline?
So there is a way for that to be incorporated in. It is the individual, the equipment operator on the road that is responsible to make that formal decision. But anytime that there is a concern that's raised through the customer service center and then through our highway hotline, that gets routed to the supervisor and the equipment operator on duty. So they'll be able to make a decision on whether they want to open or change the condition. We also work really closely with the RCMP when storms are pushing through the province, and we make sure that we're trying to balance those road conditions as required.
Thanks for that. And you're saying that so you can call in there 24/7, and it's staffed, or there's the ability, if you're calling in at 11 o'clock and you're coming down Highway 11 and the situations aren't congruent with what's displayed on the highway hotline, Is there the ability for that to be incorporated in a real time in that process with the operator as you describe?
So I just want to provide a little bit of context in terms of road conditions and the public's input into that. So, I mean, in your example, if a citizen is on Highway 11 at 11 o'clock at night and they're seeing conditions that don't, or they don't believe match the conditions that should be reported on the highway hotline, right now, outside of our core hours, they don't have the ability to reach the highway hotline. Like I said earlier, the RCMP does. They have a direct line into the highway hotline, and they're working with our operators as required. But it is important to note that, you know, every motorist has a different tolerance in terms of road conditions, and it needs to be validated by the equipment operators on the road that are trained to be able to make those decisions.
Yeah. No, thanks for that. And I think it's good questions, and maybe gets into a matter of like policy moving forward that could be discussed. Appreciate the responses. The reality is that 30 years ago we never had the highway hotline, right? The ability to look at it. It's a big improvement. It's wonderful, and we have our mobile devices to access it. And then the other asset that maybe we have here is all those folks and citizens that are out there, not unlike crop reporters in agriculture, who could play a role with some verification and stuff. So good discussion. What I would want to say to just all those that are in the service on this front and keeping those roads safe and often putting themselves at risk in the process as well. Just thank you so much to all those that keep our highways and roads safe and clean throughout these winter months. It's life and death in many situations, and they're saving lives every day with their preventative work and their response to the challenges. So thanks to all those that are involved in this work across Saskatchewan. With respect to chapter, the recommendations 1, 2, 3, and 4, I would welcome a motion to note that we concur and note progress. Moved by Ms. Lambert. All agreed? That's carried. Okay, we'll turn our attention to chapter 18, and I'll kick it over to the provincial auditor.
Thank you. Restricting vehicle weight and dimensions is one way the Ministry of Highways promotes public safety on provincial highways and protects the condition quality of highways. Chapter 18 in our 2021 report, volume 1, starting on page 219, reports the results of the progress made on the recommendations initially made in our 2017 audit of the Ministry of Highways' processes to enforce vehicle weight and dimension requirements on provincial highways. We made 5 recommendations in our 2017 audit. At December 2018, the Ministry had implemented 3 of those 5. By December 2020, the Ministry of Highways implemented the 2 outstanding recommendations. The Ministry followed its established policy requiring highway officers to report the completed results of vehicle weight and dimension joint enforcement activities. The implementation of a new records management IT system enabled the Ministry to sufficiently analyze commercial vehicle inspections and portable weigh scale activities. We found management actively monitored the completion of enforcement activities against planned by review of weekly reports. Such comparisons assist the Ministry in determining whether the Ministry's weight and dimensions enforcement activities are sufficient and appropriate. For example, highway patrol officers were on the roads completing enforcement activities as planned, such as achieving its weekly targets for number of vehicles weighed. In addition, the Ministry consistently documented its response to inquiries received through its inquiry line related to vehicle weights and dimensions. Consistently documenting responses to inquiries helps show it handles inquiries sufficiently and appropriately and considers whether adjustments to its activities are warranted. For example, Highways may be able to provide additional information about the value of overweight fines if there are lots of inquiries about fines. Also, numerous complaints about potentially overweight vehicles in a specific region may suggest highway patrol officers could focus activities in that region. This concludes my presentation on this chapter. I'll pause for the committee's consideration. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the follow-up on this front, the initial report being 2019. Thanks to the ministry for all the work and actions taken on these fronts as well and detailed in the status update. I'd see if there's a quick remark from the DM, and otherwise we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Regarding Chapter 18 of the 2021 Report Volume 1, the Ministry took the recommendations of the Provincial Auditor very seriously. The Ministry continued its oversight and improvement efforts until the transfer of Saskatchewan Highways Patrol to the newly established Provincial Protective Services. That was done in April 2022. Prior to the transfer, Highways implemented both recommendations, as was alluded to in 3.1 and 3.2, resulting in improved documentation and reporting of enforced activities. And I'll just leave my comments at that.
Sure. Thank you very much. Thanks again for the work on these fronts. I'll open it up to committee members for questions. Ms. Saar.
Thank you for this, and thank you for your opening remarks. I have had the opportunity to talk to PPS in my critic role about the work that they do, of which, as you have mentioned, highway traffic officers have now come under their purview. I don't have the opportunity usually to ask questions about it from the Ministry of Highways side of things. So I'm curious now, taking that opportunity to see if you can provide some information as to now, today, what your role is in the work that highway traffic officers do.
Good morning. Thank you for the question. Ryan Costa, Assistant Deputy Minister, Policy Planning and Corporate Services with the Ministry. So as you pointed out, since 2022, the responsibilities have transferred. So we have a memorandum of understanding in place with that ministry. And so obviously a lot of the legislative and regulatory authority still is held by the Ministry of Highways. And so that's under our Highways and Transportation Act. And so we work with them in many respects quite similar to how we did when they were with the ministry. They are our enforcement arm of the ministry. And so we meet with them at least quarterly, and we have service targets that we negotiate with that ministry, which mimic the same service targets that we had previously with our ministry. And they provide us reports on number of commercial vehicle safety assessments and inspections that they do, the number of tickets that they issue, portable weight scale use, and the number of joint enforcement blitzes or operations that they conduct with other law enforcement.
Thank you. Could you provide to the committee what the service targets are?
Yes, we have aims in terms of, depending on what the type of initiative is. So for our CVSA inspections, for instance, that we target around 7,000 a year is what we're looking for. And we don't have discrete numbers for all activities. So for joint enforcement, for instance, we just can report on, just had it here. I can get those numbers. Oh, here we go. For joint enforcement, like I said, we don't have specific targets for that. I think it's understood that that's best effort, but it's coordinated with other law enforcement agencies. And then for portable waste scale use, we had been targeting around 1,000 per year.
Do you have any reported incidents where you have not been able to meet those targets?
It varies from year to year. So we don't always hit that. Of course, we have a target and a threshold so that we can aim for best efforts. But of course, particularly with the expanded mandate of what is now Highway Patrol, it will depend obviously in terms of where they need to divert time and attention. So we make every effort, and we, as I said, meet quarterly to make sure that we're sort of still aiming towards those targets. But it depends very much in terms of where those services are required from year to year. So they does fluctuate, but we've been very close in most years.
Thank you for that. Are you able to provide to the committee the actuals in terms of targets and actual numbers hit?
I can certainly provide the targets that the Ministry of Highways establishes in our business plan. I think Corrections, Policing, and Public Safety would have to provide the actual statistics in terms of what it is that they're actually able to achieve.
Are you able to provide to the committee whether or not you've met those targets in those particular times?
Yes, we'll work with Corrections, Policing, Public Safety and get a report of those.
Thank you for that. Do you have a ballpark estimate of how much time highway traffic officers are spending fulfilling the requirements in the MOU versus broader enforcement issues that they now have the ability to pursue?
So I don't have those specifics. Again, this is part of the quarterly reporting that we do in terms of they sort of present to us what they've been able to do. Honestly, that would be a question much better put to the Provincial Protective Services Group in terms of how they're maintaining their time. I will say that in the course of their expanded duties, when they're still on the highway, they're doing both the commercial vehicle enforcement side as they were intended to originally, as well as their additional duties. So it's really a matter of them just being able to intervene on a broader suite of different potential issues.
Right. It would be of interest to know how much of that time is spent doing the other enforcement and how much of it is doing the typical highways work that you would expect traditionally a highway traffic officer do. Do you have any inclination of what that percentage would be? Like, is 70% of their time used done doing that sort of thing, and the other 30% doing the broader time? I know you've mentioned CPPS. I have a struggle getting a clear picture from both ministries, to be frank with you, so I'm trying to get as much of that information out from you as possible in terms of the work that the highway traffic officers are doing from the Ministry of Highways perspective. Thank you.
Yes, thanks for the question. So we don't have exact percentages, and I would hesitate to hazard to guess at what that percentage is, but I appreciate your question. What I can say is that we have had many occasions where we have contacted the former Highway Patrol where we've been aware of potential issues, and we've never had any service issues. So they've always been very attentive and very responsive in terms of us contacting them to ensure that they're still doing those commercial vehicle enforcement inspections. So we have every reason to believe and every confidence in their ability to still continue to do what we've asked them to do and to meet those service level targets.
Thank you. I'll ask one more way. Do you have trend data over the past couple of years now? This moved over since 2022. So are you monitoring trends? Is that moving in a particular direction that you can share with us?
So yes, I think we can. Yes, I think we can manage that. Similar to your previous question, where we talked a little bit about service targets and how those are coming along. We can work with CPPS and establish a bit of a trend in terms of how things have gone since 2022.
Could you table the MOU with the committee?
Yes, thanks for the question. I don't think from the Ministry of Highways perspective we have any concerns or issues. I think we would just like to check with Corrections, Policing, and Public Safety just to double check to make sure that there's nothing sensitive in there in terms of the law enforcement nature, but I think we should be able to provide a copy of the MOU that specifies how we work together.
Does the Ministry of Highways deal with the hiring, the employment of the highway traffic officers, or is that now through PPS?
The Ministry of Highways has no longer any control or influence over hiring of officers.
What about the equipment purchasing for highway traffic officers? That's all through PPS now, correct?
Correct. That is all CPPS as of now. So as Deputy Minister Toffin pointed out, that still goes through SAS Builds and Procurement, of course, through government procurement process officially, but it's within CPPS.
Thank you. Would you have the number of charges that highway traffic officers have laid in 22, 23, and the breakdown of the charges by type?
So no, we do not have, I don't have that data with me. It would be with CPPS, but it's perhaps something we can discuss with them.
Do you have information on, now does the budget for highway patrol still come under your ministry, or is that all PPS as well?
So that's all under Corrections, Policing, Public Safety. FTEs and budget was all transferred in April 22.
Okay. Could you provide the budget, both operating and capital, for the 2 years prior to it moving, so 22, 23, or would that be the 2 years prior to it moving over to CPBS?
Yes, so the budget actual for 2020-21 would be 6.215 million for operating, and then 21-22 is 6.299 million, when it was still with the Ministry of Highways prior to it transferring in April 2022.
Does that include capital as well?
That's, I believe that was just operating.
Could you provide capital as well?
Yeah, so team is informing me that it's approximately $1 million, or it has been in the past, up to $1 million, I should say. And that's mostly for upgrades to weigh scales and that type of thing where they would reside. So everything else would be considered expense as per accounting rules.
Thank you. Appreciate you answering my questions.
Any further questions on Chapter 18? Just maybe to summarize or to make sure we're on the same page with the undertakings to provide information back to the committee, because there's a few different undertakings there. If we can plan towards making sure that's provided within a 1-month period, again, through the committee chair. And I think some of those pieces that I heard, there was very specific commitments to, and that was to provide data trends back to the committee, as well as the answers to whether or not they're meeting targets, or you're meeting targets. And if those targets aren't being met, I'd ask that you break out which targets aren't being met and what the situation is there. You had committed to review the MOU and to, on your end, had a comfort to share that. That should be pretty straightforward around responsibilities and reporting. So that would be appreciated if you're able to share that. If there's an issue with the other ministry, just make sure the other ministry is being very clear about what the issue is if that's not able to be provided. And I think the other thing was there was a request around breaking down the charges, and that was something that I believe there's a commitment to work with the other ministry on. So are we on the same page on all of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I had those same ones written down. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Listen, thanks to everyone involved as well on the work on this front. There's implementation on all the recommendations of the auditor. I would welcome a motion at this point to conclude consideration of Chapter 18. Moved by Mr. Lemig. All agreed? That's carried. I'll turn it back over to the provincial auditor, who's going to focus on Chapters 8 and 5 together, and we have one new recommendation there.
Thank you. This presentation includes one new recommendation for the committee's consideration. So Chapter 8 of our 2021 report, Volume 2, starting on page 45, reports the Ministry of Highways for the year ended March 31st, 2021, complied with the authorities governing its activities and had effective rules and procedures to safeguard public resources other than the matters reflected in our 3 recommendations. On page 48, we recommended the Ministry of Highways accurately record its contractual obligations. The Ministry did not accurately calculate its contractual obligations, which are amounts the Ministry expects to pay in the future based on signed contracts in 2021. The Ministry's lack of accuracy and completeness of data for contractual obligations resulted in it understating its contractual obligations by $61.3 million for its March 31st, 2021 financial information. The Ministry adjusted this error. Having inaccurate records of contractual obligations can result in the Ministry's financial information and consequently the provincial government's summary financial statements containing errors. Incomplete and inaccurate information on future obligations also increases the risk of not estimating future funding needs accurately. In our 2022 report, Volume 2, Chapter 7, we assessed the Ministry implemented this recommendation as we found that March 31st, 2022, the Ministry accurately recorded $990 million in contractual obligations in its financial records. On page 48 of our 2021 report, Volume 2, we reported at March 31st, 2021, the ministry still needed to increase its monitoring of compliance with established transaction limits for purchases made using purchase cards. We found the ministry insufficiently monitored compliance with established transaction limits for purchases made using purchase cards. During 2020-2021, we identified numerous instances in our analysis where an individual made multiple payments on the same day to the same vendor on one purchase card. In each instance, the total amount paid to a vendor exceeded the $10,000 purchase card transaction limit. Not having appropriate review and approval of purchase card payments increases the risk of the ministry making inappropriate purchases. In our 2022 report, Volume 2, Chapter 7, we report that at March 31st, 2022, the ministry implemented this recommendation. We found for the 12 instances tested where the ministry had multiple payments on the same day to the same vendor on one purchase card, each payment was appropriate and for a unique invoice. On page 49 of our 2021 report, Volume 2, we reported at March 31st, 2021, the ministry continued to need to implement policies to better oversee purchases of regulated firearms and ammunition. By March 31st, 2021, the ministry implemented a policy to better oversee purchases of regulated firearms and ammunition. During that fiscal year, it had not purchased these types of items. Therefore, we were unable to assess whether the ministry followed its policy. In May 2021, regulations changed which require the ministry to obtain approval from the Ministry of Corrections, Policing and Public Safety prior to purchasing any regulated firearms or ammunition. In our 2022 report, Volume 2, Chapter 7, we found that at March 31st, 2022, the ministry followed the police regulations and obtained the required approvals before purchasing regulated ammunition. Therefore, we found this recommendation implemented in 2022. Page 49 of our 2021 report, Volume 2, reports the ministry implemented better processes to track regulated highway patrol equipment. The ministry implemented an IT system to track regulated highway patrol equipment and conducted regular inventory counts to confirm it properly accounted for equipment. On page 50, we note the ministry implemented a recommendation to follow its established procedures for removing user access to its computer systems and data. We found the ministry removed unneeded user access more timely. Lastly, in our most recent 2023 report, Volume 2, Chapter 5, starting on page 35, we report that the ministry complied with the authorities governing its activities and had effective rules and procedures to safeguard public resources for the year ended March 31st, 2023. However, the Ministry of Highways incurred a loss relating to inappropriate supplier payments. In March 2023, the ministry incorrectly paid more than $500,000 to an individual impersonating one of the ministry's suppliers. It later recovered about $400,000. In August 2023, the ministry strengthened its processes to verify and authorize changes to supplier banking information. Requiring a second individual review requested changes to supplier banking information provides additional scrutiny to the information provided and lowers the risk of inappropriate changes occurring. We suggested having other ministries follow a similar process, requiring a second independent person verify and authorize changes to supplier banking information would further reduce the risk of other ministries making inappropriate payments to illegitimate suppliers. This concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thanks for the presentation, the follow-up on these presentations and recommendations that you've made in the past as well. I'll turn it over briefly to Deputy Minister Toffin for a remark, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Regarding Chapter 8 of the 2021 report, Volume 2, the ministry is committed to safeguarding public resources. The auditor made recommendation 4.1 for accurate recording of contractual obligations in response. To this recommendation, the ministry has done a few things. We've assigned the Financial Services Unit, or as we call it, the FSU, a more active role in ensuring the completeness and accuracy of contractual obligation disclosures. We've also dedicated a role in the Project Support Office, which has been established to strengthen efforts to ensure the completeness and accuracy of year-end contractual obligation data. And also, thirdly, based on these changes, future audits have been validated and the ministry has overall improved performance on these key issues. In response to recommendation 4.2 for consistent monitoring of purchase cards, the ministry has implemented a few things as well. We've created 2 new mandatory training programs for card holders and approvers to reinforce purchase card policies and procedures. And this has been actually really important as part of our orientation for new staff as well. So it seems to be a good process to undertake. We've increased monitoring to ensure proper use of these cards as well. And this prevents transaction splitting. And it also ensures card holders were not exceeding transaction limits. The ministry also has a more consistent and systematic approach to guide managers if they suspect an issue is occurring with one of their staff members or just generally speaking. Recommendation 4.3 is related to oversight of purchases of regulated firearms and ammunition. And it is our understanding that the provincial auditor considers this recommendation only partially implemented in 2021, and it was alluded to as to why. And it's really just to reiterate, it's because although the ministry had implemented the recommended policies, the auditor wasn't able to test the implemented policies' effectiveness as there were no regulated firearms and ammunition purchases by the ministry. And this is because we don't have that program anymore. The other thing on recommendation 4.4 related to highway patrol equipment tracking, and recommendation 4.5 related to removing IT users access, these have been fully implemented. And then in regards to 2023 report volume 2 chapter 5, the ministry continued its commitment to safeguarding public resources through effective rules and procedures. And although there were no specific provincial auditor recommendations in Chapter 5 from the 2023 Report Volume 2, the auditor identified a key finding arising from an incident in March 2023 when the ministry paid $500,000 to an individual that was impersonating one of the ministry's employees. And I will say that this was quite troubling, frankly, to have to deal with something that serious. And these criminals are getting quite sophisticated on how they do this. I know in my previous role with IT and cybersecurity, it is becoming quite a challenge. But what I will say is we have recovered over $400,000 of this amount through some hard work by us and some quick action. And since then, our ministry's taken some steps to strengthen our processes for maintaining and ensuring accurate supplier information. And it's also going to require multiple individuals to verify and authorize any future changes to supplier banking information, because that's ultimately what led to this issue. So I think I'll leave my remarks at that. Obviously, that was a very serious incident and something that you know, we wish didn't happen, but we have put in measures to prevent such things in the future. And I'm happy with my team to answer any questions you may have on these recommendations.
Thanks so much for the presentation. I'll open up to committee members for questions. Ms. Saar?
Thank you for your opening remarks. I just have a few questions around cybersecurity. You've indicated that you've implemented stronger measures than existed before. Can you, do you feel, understanding that you could never feel fully confident that any sort of cybersecurity incident would not be able to happen again, but could you just speak a bit about your confidence levels in the protection of the ministry now with the new implementations?
Yeah, I think we're much more confident now that we have the right measures, but not only that we have the right measures, that we're actually communicating them to new staff and existing staff that they exist, and ensuring that we have proper training in place to do that. In addition to all of this, there are also government-wide phishing training courses too, because this could be considered almost like a phishing campaign. And those have been working quite well too. Our numbers have shown that. I don't have them exactly here because I'm not really doing that anymore. But on this particular issue with the Ministry of Highways, I feel much more confident that we have the right safeguards in place to prevent something like this from happening again.
Through your work implementing the new measures, has your organization caught any other attempts at fraudulent transactions within the ministry?
I'm not aware of any.
No, we're not aware of any, but I guess what I would say is that might be validation enough that it's working. We do have, full intention on making sure that this doesn't happen again. And by verifying banking information and going back to the supplier, in fact, if we have any doubt, it should be the right process to make sure we don't do this again.
Just a quick question, going back a chapter on purchase cards. What are the current transaction limits for those purchase cards at this time?
We have those, yeah.
Ironically, if you saw that little Twitter thing, I couldn't even get into my account. Twitter had shut it down.
Oh, what were you saying on Twitter that made them shut you down?
Well, there was some, I don't know, I don't say anything, that's the irony. But the Twitter world thought there was suspicious activity and lost their minds. And I couldn't even get in. That's a nasty world. That's a nasty world, yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you for that question. So just a bit of a breakdown here that might help kind of put some context to it. 65% of P-card monthly charge limits are $10,000 or lower. There's 30% that are between $15,000 and $75,000, and 5,000 are, or 5%, sorry, are 100,000 or more. Really, the one exception for 100,000 or greater is for fleet services, and my team kind of informs me that it's mostly the parts required for operations. And monthly limits that exceed 100,000 must be approved by the provincial controller's office. So that's this guy.
As the control. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any further questions on chapters 8 or 5, folks? Just a question maybe on Chapter 5, if you're able to share. The fraudulent act originally cost taxpayers about $500,000. You've received $400,000 back now. Are there still efforts to pursue the outstanding $100,000?
Yes, thank you. So there is still an active investigation in place by law enforcement, but we are not pursuing any further action within government based on advice from legal. It just simply would not. It's not likely to be successful, and the cost would outweigh the potential gain to sort of get back the remaining $106,000.
And it's fair. Is it fair for me to assume that this was committed by someone outside of Saskatchewan?
We believe so, but it's the investigation, of course, still underway, and so it's not clear. We do know that there was some out of province involvement in terms of where the bank account was located.
Well, thank you for identifying. I mean, very importantly, closing those gaps to ensure that you're not exposed, or that we're not exposed, moving forward on these fronts. And yeah, thanks for being forthright at this committee. Any further questions from committee members at this point? Not seeing any. There's one new recommendation in Chapter 8. I would welcome a motion to concur and note compliance with recommendation number 1, moved by Mr. Gowdy. Is that agreed? That's carried. And with respect to Chapter 5, I would welcome a motion that we conclude consideration. Moved by Mr. Harrison. All agreed? That's carried. Okay. We'll listen to Deputy Minister Toffin and the officials that have joined us and all the other officials that are connected to this work and all those that are involved in highways across Saskatchewan and keeping us safe as we get from point A to point B and as goods move across this province. I just want to say thank you. Thank you for your time today, and thank you for all those that are involved in this work. Any final word, Deputy Minister Toffin, before we kick you out of here?
Kick me out of here, but yeah. I just appreciate the opportunity to answer your questions today, and thanks to the auditor and your team too. It's been always a good working relationship, and thanks for your comments.
Thank you very much. As a committee, we'll take a brief recess, and up next is labor relations and workplace safety. And they've got a status update we would table as well. Okay, folks, we'll get rolling here and reconvene the Standing Committee on Public Accounts. I want to thank the officials here with Labor Relations and Workplace Safety for adjusting and moving forward and joining us a little earlier than was on the agenda here today. I'd ask Deputy Minister Wilby to just introduce briefly the two officials that are with him here today. Then I'll turn it over to the auditor for presentation, back to DM Wilby for subsequent response.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate that. So today I have with me Assistant Deputy Minister Alyssa Aitken, and I have our Director of Safety Operations, Isla Clausen.
Thank you to all of you for your presence here today and for your work. I'll turn it over to the Provincial Auditor to focus on Chapter 19 here today to provide her presentation, and then we'll bring it your way.
So thank you, Mr. Chair, Deputy Chair, committee members, and officials. With me today is Mr. Victor Schwab, and he's the Deputy Provincial Auditor that is responsible for the portfolio of work that does include labor relations and workplace safety. Just behind us is also Mrs. Kim Lowe from our office. She's a senior principal who is our liaison, or acting as the liaison today between our office and this committee. So Victor's going to be presenting the follow-up chapter related to the ministry's strategies for reducing injury rates. I do want to thank the Deputy Minister and his staff for the cooperation that was extended to us during the course of our work. With that, I'll turn it over to Victor.
Thank you. Chapter 19 of our 2020 report, Volume 1, on pages 223 to 225, reports the results of our first follow-up audit we did on the Ministry of Labour Relations and Workplace Safety's strategy for reducing injury rates. We made one recommendation in the 2018 performance audit. The recommendation related to issuing summary offense tickets under the occupational health and safety legislation consistent with its policy. Summary offense tickets are tickets issued by designated occupational health officers. These tickets can go up to $1,000 and may be issued in relation to a violation, like failing to ensure workers wear protective equipment. By February 2020, we found the Ministry of Labour Relations and Workplace Safety was issuing its summary offense tickets under occupational health and safety legislation consistent with its 60-day time frame set out in its policy. Our analysis of summary offense tickets issued by the ministry between February 1st, 2019 and February 6th, 2020 found the ministry issued 23 tickets during this time frame, taking 13 business days on average. The longest period from offense to ticket issuance was 25 business days. Prompt issuance of summary offense tickets reinforces the importance to employees of addressing identified violations to help reduce workplace injuries. We concluded that the ministry had implemented the audit recommendation. I will pause now for the committee's consideration.
Well, thanks once again to the auditor for the presentation and for the follow-up on this front. Just for those that are watching at home or following along here with this, committee has already considered this presentation and these chapters, and so we're here with a follow-up and update. I would also table PAC 12829, Ministry of Labour Relations and Workplace Safety Status Update dated February 5th, 2024. I'd like to thank DM Wilby and his team for providing that update and detailing the actions taken to ensure implementation on this front. I'll kick it over to Deputy Minister Wilby for a brief remark, and then we'll open up for questions.
Thanks again, Mr. Chair. Appreciate it, and thank you to the committee for having us here today. Obviously, thank you to the auditor and the work that you do. We're happy to oblige with that work and make sure that we're bettering things together. So as highlighted in the 2018 report, it was recommended that the ministry issue our summary offense tickets under occupational health and safety provisions and legislation consistent with our policy. We've implemented the recommendation using the following steps. In 2018, the ministry provided additional training to peace officers, which are our occupational health and safety officers that can issue tickets, to ensure they understood the requirement of the policy for issuing those summary offense tickets. In February of 2019, the ministry updated the summary offense ticket policy to require peace officers to issue those tickets within 60 business days of the date of the offense. And I'm pleased to share with you that in February 2020, a review found that on average, tickets were issued within 13 days, and the longest was 25 days, as the auditor had highlighted. Our ministry will continue to assess the summary offense ticket policy and process as part of our regular business to ensure Saskatchewan workplaces are healthy, safe, and productive. Since 2014, we've used summary offense tickets as one tool to help ensure that workers come home safely at the end of the day. A notice of contravention always accompanies a summary offense ticket as well. So we find this dual enforcement strategy provides the immediacy of a ticket while encouraging ongoing compliance or identification of corrective actions that would result in compliance. And of course, at the heart of that is providing that education. The ministry tries to take a multi-level approach by using education, targeted intervention, stop work orders, and when necessary, prosecution to see that workplaces are in compliance with occupational health and safety provisions and legislation and regulation. Since 2014, 235 summary offense tickets have been issued. We know the impact that serious injuries and fatalities can have on families, communities, employers, and workers, and we continue to look at ways we can reduce injury rates in our province. As Saskatchewan continues to grow, fostering a culture of workplace health and safety is essential to ensuring we're building a strong economy where all citizens can benefit. So with that, I'd be happy to address any questions members might have on the fully implemented recommendation or generally how we're working together with stakeholders to reduce injuries in the province.
Thanks for that. I'll open it up to members now for questions. Ms. Saar.
Thank you, and I appreciate your opening remarks. I have a few questions about the peace officer program. You mentioned that OH&S officers are peace officers. For my clarification, can you explain whether or not there are any other similarities to other types of what would be considered peace officers?
I appreciate the question. We have, pardon me, we have 10 occupational health and safety officers that are designated peace officers under the legislation, which of course gives them the ability to go and issue those summary offense tickets. With that additional ability, we haven't extended it to everyone. We find at this point in time, 10 is a good number. We'll continue to look at that as we go forward, of course. But those powers are really limited within their legislative authorities to issuing those summary offense tickets, as opposed to, say, stopping moving vehicles or something along those lines.
So their powers are limited to OH&S, and that's it?
Yeah, that would be correct.
And you said there are currently 10. How many have there been over the last 5 years? Could you provide me a number?
So when we started the program initially, we started with 2 as a pilot, and then from there we've grown to 10. We've been at 10 for the foreseeable past, from what we can remember. If you want an accounting and a breakdown of that and what it's done year over year, we'd be happy to provide that to the committee.
That would be great, thank you. Do you have the total number of summary offense tickets issued as well each year for the past 3 years?
I do. We can go back a few more if you want, or do you just want the 3? Let's go back a few more. All right, so in 1920, we issued 23. In 2021, we issued 16. 21-22, we issued 25. 22-23, we issued 42. And year-to-date so far, we've issued 30.
How many of those were paid upfront versus how many went through another process, whether or not they were fought, or could you provide some information as to that, how they worked their way through the system?
For sure, that's a great question. I can give you a little bit in terms of guilty, how many are still in progress and how many were stayed or withdrawn, if that works. You betcha. So going back to 1920, okay, in 1920, we had 12 that were pled guilty. We had 9 that paid in advance. We had 2 stay of proceedings. In 2021, we had 6 that were found guilty, 9 that were paid, 1 stay of proceedings. 2021, we had 13 that were found guilty, 9 that were paid, 2 stay of proceedings, and 1 withdrawn. 22-23, we had 16 that pled guilty, 21 that were paid, 1 in progress still, and 4 that were withdrawn. And 23-24, 14 guilties, 7 that were paid, 6 in progress, and 3 withdrawn.
Do you have any further information you could provide us on the tickets that were stayed or withdrawn?
Don't have individual specifics to each ticket. You know, and obviously the circumstances, as you're aware, are different pertaining to each one. Sometimes what we will see is that 2 may be issued by an officer. Pardon me. And of course, if that's the case, we may have the prosecutor or within the court system that may get moved down to 1. And so they're brought down as 1. So that would be a case or a specific case of where that might occur. But in terms of the specifics of each ticket, I don't have that information available.
Want to ask for the specifics of each individual ticket. I'm just more curious as to whether or not any of those were stayed due to delay in prosecution or lack of sufficient evidence.
Yeah, none that we're aware of at this point in time.
What about repeat offenders? Are many of those tickets provided to similar I keep calling them offenders. I'm not sure if that's appropriate in this context, but you know what I'm talking about. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Sure, I can. There very well may be some repeat. We'll use the language offenders for the time being. Reminds us of our time in Justice Committee. But obviously, if we do see repetition there, we really want to go and we want to do some targeted intervention with those employers to make sure that we're looking after some of the issues that might be there, providing that education and other support that's in place. An area we do tend to see summary offense tickets used more is in the roofing area, especially if you'll have an area of the province maybe that gets hit by hail, and some roofing companies will come into the province and maybe not wearing the fall-safe appropriate equipment that needs to be there. So that's one area that we may tend to see some repeat offenders as well. Just specific to the prosecution piece, we do have dedicated prosecutors that work with OH&S, which makes it quite useful for us, of course, and allows things like those delays not to occur in the court system because their care and attention is there on our files.
Do you have any statistics as to how many tickets are issued to similar offenders, the same offender?
We don't have that prepared today. Part of that obviously is maybe when a ticket's issued, it tends to become public, but part of that's the privacy of some of those details. What we will do is take a look back and see if there's something maybe we could provide to the committee that shows a bit of that, in at least as much detail as we can provide.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Any further questions from committee members with respect to the chapter before us? Not seeing any. So thank you for the time here today. I'd welcome a motion to conclude consideration with respect to Chapter 19 of the 2020 Report, Volume 1, Report of the Provincial Auditor, moved by Mr. Gowdy. All agreed? That's carried. DM Wilby and your officials here today, thanks for being here today and for your work on these fronts and so many others. Thank you as well to all those that are connected to this important work here today, right across Saskatchewan. Any final words before we give you the boot?
Oh, the boot's probably a good place for me. No, I appreciate the time that the committee's taken today. Appreciate the questions from the member, and thanks again for the work on these files.
You bet. Okay, we will take a recess for lunch and see the committee members at 1 o'clock here today. Thank you.